In just few decades, nearly an entire continent was taken, not by accident, but by design. Before colonization, Africa was largely independent. It was rich in cultures, powerful kingdoms, ancient trade routes, and thriving communities. From the gold markets of West Africa to the highlands of Ethiopia, Africa's societies governed themselves and maintained complex political and economic systems. But Europe was changing fast. The Industrial Revolution had transformed economies, creating an intense demand for raw materials such as rubber, cotton, minerals, and palm oil. European factories needed resources, expanding markets meant expanding empires. Soon, Africa became the focus of imperial ambition. The turning point came in November 1884. In Berlin, 14 European powers gathered at a conference convened by Otto von Bismarck. No African leaders were invited. Inside an elegant hall, diplomats discussed trade, navigation, and territory claims. Maps of Africa were spread across polished wooden tables. With rulers and pencils, borders were drawn, often as straight lines, across lands many of them had never seen. The Berlin Conference established the principle of effective occupation, meaning that European nations could claim African territory if they demonstrated control on the ground. This decision triggered a frantic race. Britain, France, Germany, Belgium, Portugal, Italy, and Spain rushed to expand their influence. Flags were planted, treaties were imposed. Within decades, vast territories had been claimed. One of the darkest chapters unfolded in Central Africa. The Congo Free State became the personal possession of King Leopold II. Under the global demand for rubber, exploitation intensified. Villages were forced into harsh labor quarters. Failure to meet them brought severe punishment. Millions of Congolese people suffered through forced labor, violence, and displacement. Reports of atrocities began reaching Africa and America. Missionaries, journalists, and activists exposed the reality of what was happening. International outrage grew, and by 1908, global pressure forced Belgium to assume official control, ending Leopold's personal rule. But the damage had already been done. Across the continent, resistance rose. Communities refused to surrender their land without struggle. In southern and western Africa, uprising challenged colonial forces. Yet, one nation stood especially determined: Ethiopia. Imperial Menelik II prepared carefully for confrontation. Italy sought to expand its colonial empire into Ethiopian territory, believing it could overpower the African kingdom. But Ethiopia mobilized tens of thousands of soldiers. In March 1896, the armies met at the Battle of Adwa. The battle quickly turned against the Italian forces. Ethiopian troops, strategically positioned in the highlands, secured a decisive victory. It was one of the few successful resistance against European colonization during this era. Ethiopia remained independent, becoming a symbol of African resilience and sovereignty. But across most of the continent, colonial rule tightened its grip. European powers drew borders with straight lines, ignoring centuries of African history. Ethnic groups were divided by foreign decisions. Others were forced together into artificial colonies. Colonial administrators imposed new systems of governance, taxation, and law. Resources flowed outward toward Europe. African economies were reshaped to serve imperial industries. Railways were constructed not to connect African societies internally, but to transport raw materials to coastal ports for export. By 1914, nearly all of Africa was under European control, except Ethiopia and Liberia. The political map of the continent had been permanently altered. After World War II, winds of change began to blow across Africa. Independence movements gained momentum. One by one, African nations reclaimed their sovereignty throughout the 1950s and 1960s. Colonial flags were lowered and new national flags were raised. Yet, the borders drawn decades earlier remained. Some regions struggled with political instability and conflict rooted in those artificial divisions. Others focused on rebuilding development and unity. Despite the challenges, modern Africa emerged as one of the world's most dynamic and rapid growing regions. Today, African nations play vital roles in global culture, economies, innovations, and diplomacy. Yet, the legacy of Scrabble for Africa still shapes the present. History's lines are not easily erased. The Scrabble for Africa was not merely a race for land, it was a turning point that reshaped a continent, and its consequences continue to shape our world today. Please like, share, and comment. Thank you.